For the 10th time, her name flashed across his phone. Isabella. With a contemptuous swipe of his thumb, Damien Blackwood silenced the call. His focus cemented on the presentation before him. He was on the verge of the biggest deal of his life, a multi-billion-dollar partnership that would catapult Blackwood Corp into the stratosphere. He couldn't be bothered with his wife's trivialities, what the housekeeper needed, or a problem with the caterer for one of her charity luncheons. He saw her as a beautiful, quiet accessory to his life, a masterpiece he'd acquired but rarely stopped to admire. He believed he was securing his future in that boardroom, never imagining that the woman he was so carelessly ignoring held the absolute power to shatter his world with a single sentence. What happens when the world's most underestimated wife decides she's done being invisible? The silence in the penthouse was a living entity. It breathed in the vast, empty spaces between the minimalist Italian furniture and clung to the cold floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park. For Isabella Rossi Blackwood, this silence was the soundtrack of her marriage. It was a silence paid for by her husband's relentless ambition, a quiet curated by a staff she rarely saw, and a loneliness she had learned to wear like a bespoke Chanel jacket, impeccably tailored and hiding everything underneath. She held her phone, the screen dark, her reflection looking back at her. Her call log showed 11 attempts to reach her husband, Damien. 11 calls sent into the void. Each one had been more urgent than the last. She had started the day with a simple text. Damien, I need to speak with you urgently. It's about my grandfather. No reply. An hour later, she called. The call went to voicemail after 2 rings, a clear, deliberate rejection. She tried again. Same result. Her calls became more frantic as the morning wore on. The news from the family estate in Geneva wasn't just bad. It was seismic. It was a world-altering event that required her, and by extension, her husband, to act. But Damien was unreachable, cocooned in the world that mattered to him, the world of power, money, and prestige. Inside the glass-walled conference room of Blackwood Corp, Damien was at the peak of his power. He paced before a holographic display, his custom Tom Ford suit fitting him like a second skin. His voice was a low, confident baritone, mesmerizing the investors from a Japanese tech conglomerate. Blackwood Corp doesn't just build smart cities, he declared, his hand slicing through the air. We build the future of human interaction. We are on the precipice of securing a revolutionary energy patent. But to do that, we need a partner with vision. A partner with legacy. His phone buzzed on the polished mahogany table. Isabella. Chloe Sterling, his sharp, ambitious vice president, noticed his glance. Her red dress was a slash of color in the otherwise monochromatic room. Everything all right, Damien? She murmured her voice, just for him. He waved a dismissive hand, not breaking eye contact with the lead investor. Just my wife. Probably a crisis over the color of the new hydrangeas for the garden. Chloe's lips curved into a smirk. She had always viewed Isabella as a relic, a beautiful but useless artifact from an older world. She was the one who worked alongside Damien, who understood the pressure, the kill-or-be-killed nature of their business. Isabella, in her eyes, was just the woman who planned his dinner parties. Some of us deal with empires, others with flower beds. Chloe whispered her comment, a drop of poison, meant to bond them together in their shared superiority. Damien's chest puffed out slightly. He loved that. He loved being seen as the man who dealt in empires. It was the identity he had constructed for himself brick by painstaking brick. He had come from nothing, a scholarship kid who'd clawed his way to the top. He had married Isabella Rossi 7 years ago, enchanted by her quiet grace and the aura of old-world European class that clung to her. He hadn't known the extent of her family's wealth. The Rossi name was respected, but notoriously private. He just knew she was the perfect elegant piece to complete the picture of Damien Blackwood, the self-made titan. He had provided her with a life of unimaginable luxury. What could she possibly need from him so urgently? Whatever it was, it couldn't be more important than this deal. Nothing was more important than this deal. This deal was his ticket to the inner circle, the rarefied air inhabited by the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts of the modern age. And the key to that world was the Metropolitan Legacy Gala that evening. It wasn't just the biggest charity event of the year. It was a hunting ground. The gala was sponsored by the Ethelgard Foundation, a notoriously private and powerful philanthropic organization. For months, Damien had been trying to get a meeting with its leadership. The foundation was sitting on the very energy patent he needed, a revolutionary technology they had acquired, and were looking for the right corporate partner to develop. The head of the foundation was a complete enigma, known only by the initials AR. No one had ever seen them in public. Tonight, AR was rumored to be making their first public appearance. Securing even 5 minutes with this person would be the coup of a lifetime. It would validate everything he had ever worked for. He silenced his phone again, the vibration a minor annoyance, and turned his full charismatic attention back to the investors. Gentlemen, Blackwood Corp is not just an investment. It is a dynasty in the making. Back in the silent penthouse, Isabella put her phone down. The 11th call had been answered not by Damien, but by his voicemail. A cold, automated voice for a cold, automated life. She walked over to the window, her hand resting on the cool glass. The view of the city was dizzying, a concrete jungle of ambition and dreams. It was Damien's world. He had brought her here, installed her in this gilded cage, and then promptly forgotten she had wings. A tear, hot and sharp, traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of fury. The news from Geneva had settled in her bones, a heavy, cold weight. Her grandfather, Alessandro Rossi. The patriarch, the titan. The man who had built a quiet empire based on integrity and innovation had passed away that morning. He was the founder and silent chairman of the Ethelgard Foundation. His final letter to her, delivered by his solicitor via a secure channel, had been clear. With his passing, the full responsibility, the title of chairwoman and the control of its vast resources now fell to her. She was AR, Alessandra Rossi, the name she used in that world, a tribute to her grandfather. He had been preparing her for this her entire life, not with business lessons, but with lessons in character, in empathy, in seeing the value of people over profit. Her urgent calls to Damien hadn't been about a family tragedy in the abstract. They had been a final test, a final hope that the man she had married, the man she had once loved, would be her partner in this monumental transition. She had wanted to tell him to face this new chapter with him, but he hadn't answered. He had dismissed her grief, her inheritance, her entire identity as an inconvenience. She wiped the tear away with the back of her hand. Her expression hardened. The quiet, graceful wife was gone, replaced by the woman her grandfather had raised her to be. Damien wanted to meet the head of the Ethelgard Foundation. Fine. He would get his wish. She turned from the window and walked toward her dressing room, a place Damien called her sanctuary, but which had always felt more like a beautifully decorated prison cell. Tonight its doors would open and she would walk out, not as Mrs. Blackwood, but as herself. And the world, especially her husband, was about to find out exactly who that was. Damien's energy was electric as he burst through the penthouse doors late that afternoon. The deal with the Japanese investors was provisionally signed contingent on one thing securing the Ethelgard patent. The Gala was no longer just an opportunity, it was the final battlefield. Isabella. He called out, his voice echoing in the marble foyer. He loosened his tie, his mind already racing, planning his approach, his pitch, his conquest. We need to leave in 2 hours. I had a dress sent over from Dior. It's in your dressing room. Black. Sophisticated. You need to look the part tonight. Isabella emerged from the hallway. Not from her dressing room, but from her private study, a room Damien rarely entered. She was already dressed, but not in the designer gown he had sent. She wore a simple, elegant silk blouse and tailored trousers. Her hair was pulled back, and she was holding a leather-bound folio. Her face was serene, but her eyes held a new, unfamiliar light. It was a cold, clear light, like a winter dawn. "I won't be wearing the Dior Damien," she said, her voice even and calm. It was a stark contrast to his frenetic energy. Damien stopped, irritated. This was not the time for games. "Don't be difficult, Isabella. Tonight is the most important night of my career. I need you to be perfect." "The black dress is perfect." "It's a beautiful dress," she conceded, placing the folio on the large mahogany table in the center of the room. "But it's not suitable for my role this evening." He laughed, a short, incredulous bark. "Your role? Your role is to be my wife. To smile, look stunning, and charm the ancient wives of my potential business partners. That's it. Now please go get ready." He started to walk past her, but she didn't move. "My grandfather died this morning, Damien." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Damien froze. He turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time that day. He saw the faint redness around her eyes, the subtle tension in her jaw. A flicker of guilt pierced his armor of ambition. He had ignored her calls. All 11 of them. "Izzy, I'm sorry." He stammered the words, feeling clumsy and inadequate. "I didn't know. My phone was... I was in the meeting of a lifetime." "I know," she said, and the simple affirmation cut deeper than any accusation. "You always are." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his mind trying to recalibrate. A death in the family. This was a complication. Okay. Look, we can cancel. We'll stay home. We'll make arrangements to fly to Geneva tomorrow. It was the proper thing to say, the husbandly thing. But even as he said it, his stomach churned at the thought of missing the gala, missing his chance at AR. "There's no need to cancel," Isabella replied, her composure unwavering. "I still have to be there. And so do you. You wouldn't want to miss it." Damien was confused. "What are you talking about? Your grandfather just died. Why would you want to go to a party?" "It isn't a party for me. It's a responsibility," she said, tapping the folio. "Alessandro's passing has accelerated some things. There are duties I must now formally assume." He still wasn't understanding. He saw her grief as a logistical problem, an emotional detour from his path to glory. "Look, whatever it is, it can wait. A night of mourning is the least you can do. It's what's expected. What's expected of me is no longer your concern," she said, the coldness in her voice now unmistakable. She turned and walked toward her dressing room. I will be ready to leave in an hour, but I will be taking my own car. Damien stood alone in the vast living room, baffled and annoyed. Her grief was making her irrational dramatic. He'd apologize properly later, buy her a diamond bracelet to make up for his inattention. But tonight, he had a mission. He would go to the gala, find AR, and secure his destiny. He'd deal with his wife's strange mood later. He assumed she would eventually put on the Dior dress and come to her senses, sliding back into the role he had assigned her. An hour later, as Damien's Bentley was pulling up to the front of their building, another car, a sleek, understated but obviously armored Maybach, pulled up behind it. He watched, puzzled, as Isabella exited the building. She had not put on the Dior. Instead, she wore a custom-made Armani gown in a deep sapphire blue. The color was regal commanding. Around her neck was a single breathtaking piece of jewelry, a diamond and sapphire necklace he had never seen before. It wasn't flashy. It was regal, a piece that spoke of generations of wealth, not a single season's bonus. Her hair was styled in an elegant chignon, and her makeup was subtle but flawless. She didn't look like a grieving granddaughter. She didn't look like his quiet, unassuming wife. She looked like a queen. A man in a dark suit, clearly a professional security detail, opened the door of the Maybach for her. She didn't even glance at Damien or his Bentley. She simply got into her car, and it pulled away smoothly into the Manhattan traffic, heading downtown. Damien was left standing on the sidewalk, a storm of confusion and anger brewing inside him. Who was this woman? Where did that car come from? And that necklace? It must have been worth more than his first-year profits. Chloe called him, then her voice crisp and impatient. Damien. Where are you? The pre-gala reception is starting. Everyone who's anyone is here. I'm on my way, he snapped, getting into his car. He slammed the door shut, his mind reeling. For the first time in their 7 years of marriage, he had the unsettling feeling that he didn't know his wife at all. A part of him was furious at her defiance, but another smaller part was unnerved. It was the feeling a chess player gets when his opponent makes a move so unexpected, so outside the known rules of the game, that he realizes he might not be playing against a novice after all. He pushed the thought aside. He had more important things to worry about. He had to find AR. His entire future depended on it. The Carlisle Hotel was transformed. A river of black-tie guests flowed up the grand staircase, their diamonds and laughter echoing in the gilded hall. This was Damien's natural habitat. He moved through the crowd with the predatory grace of a shark, a glass of champagne in one hand, his eyes scanning, assessing hunting. Chloe, a vision in emerald green, was at his side. The CEO of Omnicorp is by the bar, she murmured. And I saw Jacob Stern, the private equity king, talking to a senator near the terrace. The target, however, is nowhere to be seen. The target was AR. The whispers about the head of the Ethelgard Foundation were everywhere. Some said AR was a reclusive tech billionaire who had cashed out and turned to philanthropy. Others whispered it was an old European aristocrat. The mystery only added to the foundation's allure. Its sponsorship of the gala was a statement of immense power. They'll be here, Damien said, his confidence a carefully constructed facade. Isabella's dramatic exit had shaken him more than he cared to admit. Someone this powerful doesn't sponsor an event like this and not show up. They'll make an entrance. He saw a few familiar faces, rivals he'd bested, allies he'd cultivated. They greeted him with the requisite mix of professional courtesy and thinly veiled envy. He was Damien Blackwood, the man of the hour, the one whose name was on everyone's lips. He was exactly where he wanted to be. Then he saw her. Isabella was standing near a marble column, speaking with a man he recognized instantly. Marcus Thorne, the formidable silver-haired chairman of the Federal Reserve. They weren't making small talk. Isabella was speaking, and Thorne was listening with an intensity and deference Damien had never seen him afford anyone, let alone himself. Damien's smile tightened. What was she doing talking to Marcus Thorne? He started towards them, a possessive proprietary anger rising in him. Chloe put a hand on his arm. "Careful, Damien," she warned. "Don't make a scene. People are watching." He brushed her off. He was her husband. He had every right. As he approached, he saw Isabella laugh at something Thorne said. A genuine, confident laugh he hadn't heard in years. She looked radiant, poised, and utterly at ease in this world of power he thought was exclusively his. "Isabella, darling," he said, his voice a little too loud, forcing his way into the conversation. He placed a hand on the small of her back, a gesture of ownership. "I was wondering where you'd gone." Isabella didn't flinch. She simply turned her head slightly, her sapphire eyes meeting his. The coldness in them was startling. "Damien, I was just catching up with an old friend. You know Marcus, of course." Thorne turned his expression unreadable. "Blackwood," he said, his nod curt. There was no warmth in it. "My deepest condolences on your loss, Isabella. Alessandro was a giant, a mentor, and a dear friend. The world is poorer for his absence." Damien was stunned into silence. Marcus Thorne knew Isabella's grandfather, knew him well enough to call him a mentor. "Thank you, Marcus," Isabella said, her voice warm for the first time that evening. "He always spoke very highly of you." Damien felt like an intruder at his own party. He tried to recover, to assert his place. "Yes, a terrible loss. We're all devastated. I was just telling Isabella she shouldn't have come tonight, but she insisted on being brave." He tried to frame it as her emotional whim, painting himself as the concerned husband. Isabella's smile was thin and sharp as a razor's edge. "Bravery has nothing to do with it. Some duties can't be postponed." She turned her back on Damien, returning her full attention to Thorne. "Marcus, we must discuss the Foundation's new arts endowment next week. My grandfather left some very specific instructions. The Ethelgard Foundation." The name hit Damien like a physical blow. He stared at his wife, at the impossible connection being drawn in front of him. No, it was impossible. A coincidence. She must be on one of the Foundation's junior boards, a position he'd probably secured for her years ago and forgotten about. A little charity work to keep the wives of important men busy. That had to be it. Thorne nodded. "Of course, Madam Chairwoman. My office will be at your disposal." Madam Chairwoman. The words echoed in the sudden roaring silence of Damien's mind. He felt the blood drain from his face. Chloe had come up behind him, having heard the entire exchange. Her perfectly made-up face was a mask of disbelief. Isabella finally turned to face them both. She looked at Damien, and for the first time, he saw a glimmer of what looked like pity in her eyes. "Damien, you look pale," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "Perhaps you should get some air." She then looked at Chloe, her gaze sweeping over the other woman from head to toe. It was not a jealous glare, but something far more chilling, a dismissal. It was the look one gives to a piece of furniture that is about to be replaced. Without another word, Isabella excused herself from Thorne, and glided away into the crowd, which seemed to part for her as if by magic. Heads turned. Whispers followed in her wake. She wasn't just another beautiful woman in a designer gown anymore. A palpable aura of power now surrounded her, an invisible current that Damien, for all his ambition, had never been able to generate. Chloe finally spoke, her voice a strained whisper. "What the hell was that, Madam Chairwoman?" "It's a mistake. It has to be." But Damien knew it wasn't. The pieces were slotting together in his mind with horrifying speed. The secrecy of her family. The calls he ignored. The Maybach. The necklace. Her strange confidence. Her words. "It's not suitable for my role this evening." He had spent months, poured millions into research and lobbying, trying to get the attention of the mysterious AR. He had fantasized about this meeting, about the moment he would finally stand face to face with the person who held the key to his empire. All this time he had been sleeping next to them. He had ignored their calls. He had told them what to wear. He had treated them like a decorative object. The room suddenly felt hot, suffocating. The champagne in his hand tasted like ash. He watched his wife across the room now in conversation with a senator and a tech CEO he'd been trying to meet for a year. They were all listening to her. She was the center of that universe, and he was on the outside looking in for the very first time. The hunter had just realized he was the prey. The hum of the crowd began to quiet as David Calloway, the city's beloved philanthropist and the evening's master of ceremonies, tapped the microphone on the grand stage. A cascade of light from the chandeliers above bathed the ballroom in a warm golden glow. Damien stood frozen in place, a statue of dread amidst the sea of oblivious elites. Chloe was beside him. Her earlier confidence shattered, replaced by a nervous, predatory stillness. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here tonight." Calloway's voice boomed rich and inviting. "Your generosity tonight will change the lives of thousands of children at the New York Children's Hospital. We have shattered all previous fundraising records, and that is thanks in no small part to the unprecedented, truly historic contribution of our main sponsor." A ripple of intrigued murmurs went through the room. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Damien's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a desperate, insane hope that he had misunderstood everything, that it was all a bizarre, cruel coincidence, that Madam Chairwoman was an honorary title for some minor subcommittee. His entire world was balanced on the edge of a knife, and Calloway was about to let it drop. For years, the Ethelgard Foundation has operated with quiet dignity and profound impact, guided by the vision of its late founder, Alessandro Rossi. Calloway continued. The name Rossi hung in the air. A few people in the crowd who knew the connection turned to look at Isabella, who was now standing near the front of the stage, her posture one of perfect regal calm. Most, however, were still oblivious. Damien felt Chloe's sharp nails dig into his arm. "Rossi," she hissed. That Rossi Damien couldn't speak. His throat was dry, his mind a maelstrom of denial and terror. Alessandro was a force of nature, a man who believed that true wealth is measured not by what you accumulate, but by what you contribute. Calloway went on, his voice filled with genuine reverence. He shaped our world from the shadows, seeking no credit, only progress. Before he passed, he ensured his legacy would continue, placing his life's work into the hands of a successor he had been preparing since birth. A successor who has until now chosen to honor his tradition of privacy. Damien's eyes were locked on Isabella. She wasn't looking at the stage. She was looking directly at him. Her expression was not triumphant, not angry, not sad. It was empty. It was the look of a judge who had already passed sentence. In that moment he saw the full scope of his catastrophic miscalculation. He hadn't just neglected his wife, he had disdained a monarch without realizing she wore a crown. The leadership of the Ethelgard Foundation is a closely guarded secret, Calloway said, leaning closer to the microphone, his voice dropping conspiratorially. The visionary leader known to the world only as AR is in this room tonight. They have decided that this evening, in honor of Alessandro's memory, and to launch the Foundation's most ambitious initiative, yet it is time to step into the light. The air in the ballroom was thick with anticipation. Phones were being subtly raised. The press cordoned off at the back, surged forward against the velvet ropes. Damien felt a cold sweat bead on his forehead. He wanted to run, to disappear, but his feet were bolted to the floor. This was his nightmare, and he was the star of it. He thought of the morning of the 11 missed calls. He thought of his condescending tone, his casual dismissal. Probably a crisis over the color of the new hydrangeas. The memory made him physically sick. She hadn't been calling about flowers. She had been grieving the loss of her grandfather. She had been stepping into the role of one of the most powerful people in the world. And she had reached out to him, her husband, and he had sent her to voicemail. "It is my distinct honor." Calloway's voice swelled, filling every corner of the vast room, to introduce to you for the very first time the mind behind the mission, the heart of the Foundation, and the guardian of Alessandro Rossi's legacy. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the chairwoman of the Ethelgard Foundation. Damien shut his eyes. He couldn't bear to see it. He could only hear the name that would detonate his life. Mrs. Isabella Rossi Blackwood. For a single drawn-out second, the world stopped. A collective intake of breath seemed to suck the very air from the ballroom. Then a wave of stunned silence, so absolute and profound that the clinking of a single ice cube in a distant glass sounded like a gunshot. Damien's eyes snapped open. It was real. The nightmare was real. Every head in the room, hundreds of them, swiveled in unison. First, they looked towards the stage, then as if pulled by an invisible string, they turned towards him. They were looking for his reaction. He was part of the spectacle. His humiliation was the appetizer to Isabella's main course. He saw it all in a dizzying, slow-motion montage. The dropped jaws, the wide, disbelieving eyes of his competitors, the frantic whispering that erupted like wildfire, spreading from table to table. He saw Marcus Thorne, the Fed chairman, nodding slowly, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He saw Jacob Stern, the private equity king, raise an eyebrow, his calculating gaze flicking from Isabella to Damien, already reassessing deals and power dynamics. And Chloe. He turned to her and saw the blood drain from her face. Her mask of cool ambition was gone, replaced by a raw, ugly look of shock and envy. Her dream of supplanting Isabella, of becoming Mrs. Blackwood, had just been revealed as a pathetic delusion. She hadn't been competing with a simple society wife. She'd been trying to sideline a queen. The realization seemed to age her 10 years in an instant. But it was Isabella who held the room captive. As her name echoed, she took a step forward into the spotlight. The sapphire blue of her dress seemed to absorb the light, making her glow. The Rossi necklace around her neck glittered not as an ornament, but as a sigil of power. She moved with an unhurried, unshakable grace, the picture of serene authority. The quiet, reserved woman Damien had known for 7 years was gone. In her place stood a stranger, a formidable, commanding presence, who owned the very ground she walked on. She ascended the small set of stairs to the stage, her expression calm and composed. She shook David Calloway's hand, murmuring a quiet thank you, before turning to face the audience. She didn't look at the teleprompter. She didn't need it. Her eyes swept across the sea of stunned faces, pausing for a fraction of a second to meet Damien's. In that fleeting glance, he saw the abyss that had opened between them. It was a chasm of his own making, dug with every ignored call, every dismissive comment, every time he had made her feel small, so he could feel big. The silence finally broke, replaced by a smattering of applause, which quickly grew into a thunderous, sustained ovation. It was a recognition of the shock, the drama, the sheer audacity of the reveal. They were applauding the ultimate power play. Damien felt his legs tremble. He had to grip the back of a chair to steady himself. His carefully constructed universe, with him at the center, had just been inverted. He was no longer the sun. He was a forgotten, insignificant moon orbiting a star, whose brilliance he had never even bothered to notice. He watched his wife stand at the podium, a symbol of everything he craved: legacy, respect, true power. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he had lost it all. He had been handed the keys to the kingdom on his wedding day, and in his arrogance he had mistaken them for trinkets. The applause died down, and a hush fell over the room once more. Isabella leaned toward the microphone. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, but it was clear and resonant, carrying to every corner of the ballroom. It was the voice of a woman who had found her power and was about to use it. "Thank you." She began, her gaze sweeping over the audience deliberately, avoiding her husband. "My grandfather, Alessandro Rossi, believed in a simple principle. True innovation is born not from ambition, but from empathy." The first sentence was a death blow. His entire company was built on ambition. She had just invalidated his whole philosophy of life without ever mentioning his name. Damien felt the blood rushing in his ears, his vision narrowing until the only thing he could see was the woman on stage, the woman he called his wife, systematically dismantling his world. For decades, Isabella continued her voice, holding the rapt attention of everyone in the room. The Ethelgard Foundation has worked to identify and nurture technologies that serve humanity first and profit second. We have operated from the shadows because my grandfather believed that the work should always be more important than the name attached to it. He taught me that integrity is what you do when no one is watching. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and Damien felt each one pierce his soul. His entire business model was built on public perception, on splashy announcements, and the cult of his own personality. He lived for the spotlight, for the watching eyes. "Tonight we are stepping out of those shadows for a singular purpose," she announced. In his final directive, my grandfather entrusted the foundation with the stewardship of a revolutionary clean energy patent, a technology with the potential to reshape our world, to heal our planet, and to democratize power for generations to come. This was it, the patent Damien had been willing to kill for. He watched, helpless, as she spoke of it with an easy familiarity, the way he might talk about a minor corporate acquisition. This technology is too important to be entrusted to a partner driven solely by market share or stock price. Isabella declared, her gaze now sweeping across the CEOs and investors in the room. It requires a partner whose values align with our own. A partner who understands that legacy is not about the buildings you erect, but the foundations you lay for others. A partner who listens, who respects and who values partnership, not as a means to an end, but as a sacred trust. The subtext was so loud, it was practically a scream. She was talking about him. She was telling the entire world, everyone he had ever wanted to impress, that he was unworthy. She was not just rejecting his business. She was dissecting his character and finding it wanting on a global stage. She then announced the Foundation's plan. They would not be selling the patent to a single corporation. Instead, they were opening a multi-billion-dollar innovation grant, inviting companies from around the world to collaborate in an open-source development initiative. She was effectively taking the prize off the table and giving it to the world, making Damien's cutthroat pursuit of it seem greedy and small-minded. Her speech ended with a tribute to her grandfather, her voice softening for the first time with genuine emotion. When she finished, the ballroom erupted. The applause was deafening, a genuine roaring tribute to her vision and power. As she stepped down from the stage, she was immediately swarmed. Marcus Thorne was the first to reach her, followed by a dozen of the most powerful people in the city, all clamoring for a moment of her time. Their business cards extended like offerings. Damien was an island in the middle of the chaos. People who had been fawning over him an hour ago now gave him a wide berth, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. He had become a pariah in his own kingdom. Chloe had already vanished. She knew a sinking ship when she saw one. He had to get to her. He pushed through the crowd, his apologies and excuses ignored. He finally broke through the circle of admirers and stood before his wife. "Isabella," he said, his voice hoarse. She turned to him, her face an unreadable mask. The powerful people around her fell silent, sensing the impending drama. "We need to talk," he pleaded, his voice low and urgent. "In private." "We have nothing to talk about, Damien," she replied, her voice as cold as glacial ice. "You made your position perfectly clear this morning. 11 times. The public shaming was brutal. A few people nearby winced. I didn't know," he hissed, desperate. "If you had told me, if I had any idea who you were. That's the point." She cut him off, her voice dangerously quiet. "You shouldn't have had to know who I was to listen. You only needed to know that I was your wife. The woman who was trying to tell you that her grandfather, the man who walked her down the aisle to you, had just died. But that wasn't important enough for you. The deal was, your ambition was." The truth of her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't about the money or the power he had missed out on. It was about this fundamental human failure. "I'm sorry," he whispered the words, feeling pathetic and hollow. "Izzy, please. Let's go home. We can fix this." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Fix this, Damien. You don't fix a shattered vase. You just sweep up the pieces. And you," she said, her eyes boring into his, "are no longer welcome in my home." She turned her back on him, then giving her full attention to Marcus Thorne, dismissing him as completely and utterly as he had dismissed her calls. The circle of power closed around her, pushing Damien out, leaving him utterly and completely alone in the center of the crowded room. His empire and his marriage turning to dust around him. The fallout was not a wave, but a tsunami. It began the moment Damien stumbled out of the Carlisle, the echoes of applause for his wife, a roaring torment in his ears. The usual phalanx of paparazzi and society reporters paid him no mind, their lenses and questions, all aimed at the hotel's grand entrance, waiting for another glimpse of the woman who had just redrawn the city's entire power map. Damien Blackwood, the man who lived for the camera's flash, had become invisible. His driver, a man who typically leaped out to open the door, simply watched him approach, his expression a careful blank. The ride back to the penthouse was a journey through a silent personal hell, the city lights blurring into streaks of condemnation against the tinted windows. When he arrived, the cavernous apartment felt different. The silence that had once been a symbol of his sterile control was now accusatory, amplifying his solitude. He walked through the marble halls, his footsteps echoing like a judge's gavel. He went to Isabella's dressing room, a space he had always considered a frivolous indulgence. He saw the black Dior gown he had sent for her, still hanging in its garment bag. It looked like a funeral shroud. On the vanity table, a single object was placed in the center, her wedding ring. Next to it was the simple gold band he had given her. The diamonds of her engagement ring glittered under the recessed lighting, looking cold and sharp. The message was absolute. Their marriage wasn't just broken. It had been formally dissolved in her heart long before any court would make it official. He slept for 2 hours in a guest room, a fitful, nightmare-plagued sleep, and awoke to the full fury of the world he had once commanded. His phone, which he had silenced for Isabella, was now a screaming, vibrating beacon of his own implosion. Hundreds of messages, alerts, and missed calls. The headlines were brutal. The Wall Street Journal ran a measured but devastating analysis titled Blackwood's Blind Spot, a crisis of character and governance. The tabloids were less kind. Blackwood blackballed by secret queen wife screamed one. His face was plastered everywhere, a portrait of arrogance moments before the fall, often next to a radiant, powerful image of Isabella on stage. Blackwood Corp's stock opened in a nosedive. The ticker was a river of red, washing away billions in market value before the first morning coffee was finished. The Japanese investors formally retracted their offer in a terse public statement before 9:00 a.m. His board summoned him, not to a meeting, but to a tribunal. He walked into the boardroom of the company he had bled. For the company he had built, from a single idea into a global force, and was met not with sympathy or even anger, but with the cold, dead-eyed pragmatism of men protecting their money. His allies of yesterday were his executioners today. The chairman of the board, a man Damien had personally installed, didn't even offer him a seat. The reputational damage is catastrophic. Damien, the chairman, stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Your personal life has compromised the fiduciary duty we have to our shareholders. Your judgment has been called into question in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. This is a private matter. Damien roared, his voice cracking. It has nothing to do with the company's performance. It has everything to do with it. A woman from the board, Eleanor Vance, countered coolly. You spent millions and months of corporate resources chasing a patent held by your own wife. You failed to perform the most basic due diligence. You were either grossly negligent or you were lying to this board. Which is it? Damien had no answer. He stood there exposed and powerless as they invoked clause after clause from his contract, systematically stripping him of his power. First, his role as chairman was suspended. Then an interim CEO was appointed effective immediately. By the end of the hour, he was escorted to his office by security to collect his personal belongings, as he boxed up a few photos and a single heavy award. He could see the new CEO, a man who had once been his subordinate, already directing people to change the nameplate on his door. He was erased. The empire he had constructed had devoured him. Meanwhile, Isabella was not celebrating. She had spent the night after the gala in a quiet suite at the plaza, a location her security team had prepared weeks in advance. She had known this confrontation was a possibility, a final terrible option if Damien proved himself to be the man she feared he had become. Her first call was not to her lawyers, but to the New York Children's Hospital, authorizing an immediate wire transfer of the gala's proceeds, plus a supplemental anonymous donation from her personal accounts that doubled the total. Her second call was to the head of her family's estate in Geneva to begin making arrangements for her grandfather's memorial. Her grief for Alessandro was a deep, steady ache, but it was now interwoven with a new grief for her marriage. She had loved Damien, or at least the man she believed him to be, the ambitious, driven young man who had seemed so full of promise. But she now understood that his ambition wasn't a fire that built things. It was a black hole that consumed them. It had consumed their love, his integrity, and finally his own creation. In the months that followed, their worlds diverged so completely, it was as if they had lived on different planets all along. Damien became a ghost. He holed up in a 5-star hotel, living off his severance package, a gilded prison, where he could watch the world move on without him. He'd spend his days in a bitter alcohol-fueled haze, flipping through channels only to be confronted by Isabella's image. There she was, meeting with the UN Secretary General. There she was on the cover of Time magazine, lauded as a New Age philanthropist, reinventing the rules. There she was announcing the first recipients of the Ethelgard Clean Energy Grant, a consortium of innovative startups, including one led by a brilliant young scientist Damien had arrogantly dismissed a year prior. His attempts to reconnect with his old life were met with polite, impenetrable walls. The friends who had once clamored for his invitations now had their secretaries inform him they were in a meeting. He was a social leper, a cautionary tale whispered at the very galas he once dominated. In the lonely, quiet hours of the night, the memory of the 11 missed calls would return to haunt him. He would see her name flashing on his screen, feel the phantom vibration in his hand, and remember the casual, contemptuous swipe of his thumb. It was the single most destructive act of his life, an act of such profound arrogance that it had cost him everything. He hadn't just lost a company or a fortune. He had lost the chance to stand beside a truly great woman, not as her master, but as her equal. The depth of that loss was an ocean, and he was drowning in it. Isabella, conversely, had never been more alive. She shed the Blackwood from her name as easily as a snake sheds its skin, becoming simply Isabella Rossi. She stepped into the role her grandfather had prepared her for, with a natural, commanding grace. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was a visionary. She traveled the world, her focus shifting from society galas to field sites for clean water projects and mobile health clinics. She spoke not in the empty corporate jargon Damien favored, but with a quiet intelligence and genuine empathy that moved people. She discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, a resilience forged in the lonely silence of her marriage. She learned that power wasn't about dominating a room, it was about inspiring it. Legacy wasn't your name on a building, it was the lives you changed for the better. The final divorce decree arrived for Damien on a cold Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a stoic courier. It was just a stack of papers, the legal codification of a reality he had been living for months. He signed them without reading, his hand steady. The rage had burned out, leaving only a hollowed-out landscape of regret. It was over. On that same day, Isabella was in her grandfather's old office overlooking Central Park. Her lawyer called with the news. She thanked him, her voice even. After hanging up, she didn't move for a long time. She looked out at the autumn leaves, a riot of gold and red against the grey sky. She felt a pang, a ghost of a memory of her and Damien walking through that same park years ago, when their future had seemed as bright and full of colour as the trees before her. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, not for the man he became, but for the man she had hoped he would be. Then the intercom on her desk buzzed. "Madam Chairwoman," her assistant's voice came through crisp and respectful. "The architects for the new research hospital are here to see you." Isabella wiped the tear away. The past was the past. Her grief had been honored, her accounts settled. The future was waiting. She had lost a husband who saw her as an accessory. But she had found her purpose. She had inherited an empire of wealth, but she had built an empire of self. "Send them in," she said, her voice filled with a calm, unshakable strength. "We have work to do." Isabella's journey from a silenced wife to a global force serves as a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the most to say. Her story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about reclaiming her name, her power, and her voice from a world and a man that tried to render her invisible. She proved that true strength isn't about the noise you make or the attention you demand, but about the integrity you hold when no one is watching. Damien's empire was built on sand, on the fragile ego of one man. Hers is built on a foundation of purpose, a legacy that will outlive them all. Her story is a testament to the fact that underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake you ever make. If Isabella's incredible story of transformation and justice inspired you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own hidden strength. And most importantly, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of karma empowerment and the shocking secrets hidden just beneath the surface. Thank you for listening. A missed appointment, a single photograph. That's all it took to shatter a picture-perfect life. For Olivia, it was the day of her baby's first ultrasound, a day her billionaire husband Richard swore he wouldn't miss. But while she was alone in that cold, sterile room, he was somewhere else entirely. He was on a sun-drenched beach, his arm wrapped not around his pregnant wife, but around a woman the world would soon know. He thought his secrets were safe, buried under piles of money. He had no idea he was married to a woman who was about to make him headline news. The silence in the ultrasound room was a living thing. It was a cold, clinical hum that seemed to amplify the frantic thumping of Olivia's own heart. She stared at the large monitor, a blank grey screen that held the promise of her future, a future she was supposed to be sharing. Her hand, trembling slightly, rested on the curve of her stomach. 4 months. 4 months of morning sickness, of strange cravings, and of a burgeoning love so fierce it almost frightened her. "He's just running a little late, I'm sure," Dr. Evans said, her voice a practiced, soothing melody that did nothing to calm the storm in Olivia's chest. "Richard is a busy man." Olivia forced a smile, a brittle thing that felt like it might crack her face. "Yes, always busy." She had repeated that phrase so many times, it had become a mantra, an excuse, a shield. Richard Sterling, the real estate mogul, the darling of Wall Street, the man whose face was plastered on the cover of Forbes, was always busy. His time was measured in millions of dollars, in deals that shaped the city's skyline. She knew that. She had accepted that. But today was supposed to be different. He had promised. "Live, my love," he'd said just last night, his voice a low, intoxicating rumble as he traced the line of her jaw. "Nothing in this world would make me miss seeing our baby for the first time. I'll move mountains. I'll reschedule the mayor. That's our moment." His words, like everything else about him, had been perfect. Richard was a master architect, not just of buildings, but of moments. Their life together was a carefully constructed masterpiece of glamour and romance. Spontaneous trips to Paris on his private jet, front row seats at New York Fashion Week, whispered sweet nothings over candlelit dinners at restaurants, so exclusive they didn't have names. He had swept into her life a whirlwind of charm and power, and she, a quiet, unassuming librarian, had been caught up in the storm, dizzy with a happiness she'd never imagined possible. But lately the perfection had started to feel fragile. There were the hushed phone calls he would take in the other room, the sudden business trips that seemed to pop up with alarming frequency. When she'd asked, he'd smiled, that disarming smile of his, the one that made her feel silly and paranoid. "Just putting out fires, my love. The price of success." And she had believed him. She wanted to believe him. An hour passed. The grey screen remained blank. Dr. Evans, her professional patience wearing thin, suggested they reschedule. Olivia felt a hot flush of shame. The other women in the waiting room with their proud, beaming partners had glanced at her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The pregnant wife of the billionaire, all alone. "No, let's just do it," Olivia said, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't bear the thought of coming back, of reliving this humiliation. She needed to see her baby. She needed to know that one thing at least was real. The cold gel on her stomach was a shock. She flinched as Dr. Evans moved the transducer. And then it happened. A flicker on the screen. A tiny, pulsating shape. A sound filled the room. A rhythmic, powerful whooshing that was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. "There's the heartbeat," Dr. Evans said, her voice softening with genuine warmth. "Strong and steady. Congratulations, Olivia. You have a very healthy baby." Tears streamed down Olivia's face, hot and silent. It was a girl, her daughter. In that moment, the ache of Richard's absence was a sharp, physical pain, a gaping wound in what should have been a perfect memory. She took the grainy, black and white photos, her fingers caressing the image of the tiny life inside her. She sent him a text. "We saw her today. She's perfect." The reply came hours later, a terse, impersonal message. "Knew she would be. So sorry, Liv. Got dragged into an emergency meeting with investors from Dubai. Still locked in. We'll make it up to you, I promise." The disappointment was a bitter pill. She tried to swallow it to be the understanding wife she had always been. She drew a bath in their palatial penthouse apartment, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars. She tried to focus on the joy on the little girl who was now her entire world, but the unease lingered, a shadow she couldn't shake. It was that night, as she mindlessly scrolled through her phone, a habit she'd picked up to fill the long, lonely evenings, that the shadow took form. It started as a knot in her stomach, a prickle of dread. Her friend Maya had sent her a link to a popular Instagram gossip account, one that chronicled the lives of the rich and shameless. The caption was innocuous: "Another day in paradise." But the picture, The picture stole the air from her lungs. It was a selfie, a sun-drenched, carefree selfie taken on a pristine white sand beach. In the foreground, a woman with a mane of platinum blonde hair and a predatory smile pouted at the camera. Her name was Chloe Vanderbilt, a socialite and so-called influencer whose manufactured life was a constant source of tabloid fodder. But it wasn't Chloe's face that made Olivia's world tilt on its axis. It was the man beside her. He was shirtless, his skin bronzed, a pair of expensive sunglasses perched on his head. His arm was wrapped possessively around Chloe's waist, his hand splayed possessively on her hip. He was smiling a wide, genuine, unguarded smile that Olivia hadn't seen in months. It was Richard. The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. The emergency meeting with Dubai investors. The city skyline behind him wasn't Dubai. It wasn't even New York. It was the unmistakable turquoise water and lush green hills of St. Bart's. The lie was so audacious, so brazen it was almost comical. He hadn't just missed the most important day of her life. He had been with another woman. He had posted the evidence for the world to see a digital middle finger to her and their unborn child. The heartbreak was a tidal wave, a crushing force that left her gasping for breath. But as the initial shock subsided, something else began to bubble up from the depths of her despair. It was a cold, hard fury, an emotion so intense it burned away the tears. He had underestimated her. He had seen her as a quiet, compliant accessory to his perfect life. He had never bothered to look deeper, to see the steel beneath the silk. He thought he could break her heart and walk away unscathed. That night, lying alone in their king-sized bed, the city lights mocking her with their cold, indifferent beauty, Olivia made a promise to herself and to the tiny, sleeping life inside her. Richard Sterling wanted to be famous. He loved the spotlight. Well, she was about to give him the performance of a lifetime. He didn't know it yet, but he had just become the star of a new story, and she would be the one writing the headlines. The first 24 hours were a blur of managed hysteria. Olivia moved through the opulent emptiness of the penthouse, like a ghost, her every action mechanical. She made coffee she didn't drink. She stared out at the panoramic view of Central Park without seeing it. The picture on her phone was a brand on her mind, seared into her memory with the heat of betrayal. Richard, Chloe, St. Bart's, her husband, the man who had vowed to cherish her, was a liar. And not just a simple liar, but one of breathtaking arrogance. The sheer audacity of it was what kept replaying in her mind. He hadn't even bothered to be discreet. It was a public declaration of his infidelity, a smug display of his power. He believed he was untouchable, that his wealth and status were a shield that made him invulnerable to consequences. His texts started coming in a steady stream, a pathetic attempt at damage control. Liv just landed back in NY. Meeting was a killer. I'm exhausted. Heading straight to the office. So much to catch up on. Can't wait to see you tonight. I've missed you. Each message was a fresh twist of the knife. She didn't reply. Her silence was a new and unfamiliar weapon, and she wielded it with a chilling precision. Let him wonder. Let him sweat. For the first time in their relationship, she had the upper hand, and she had no intention of relinquishing it. That afternoon, the doorbell chimed a sharp, intrusive sound that shattered the funereal silence. It was Maya, her best friend, since their college days, a fiery, no-nonsense lawyer with a bullshit detector that was second to none. She took one look at Olivia's pale, tear-streaked face and enveloped her in a hug that was fierce and protective. I saw it. Maya said, her voice laced with a venom that was strangely comforting. That scumbag. That narcissistic, fame-hungry pig. I swear, Olivia, I will personally key his precious Bugatti. Olivia let out a choked laugh that was half a sob. Don't bother. It's probably Elise. Maya pulled back her sharp, intelligent eyes, scanning Olivia's face. What are you going to do? I don't know, Olivia whispered the confession, a painful admission of her own helplessness. He owns everything. This apartment, the cars, the bank accounts. I'm a librarian, Maya. I have a savings account with $3,000 in it. You have more than that, Maya said, her voice firm. You have a prenuptial agreement. I read every single word of that document before I let you sign it. It's ironclad. He might be a bastard, but his lawyers are meticulous. There's an infidelity clause. A big one. The prenup. Olivia had almost forgotten about it. At the time, it had seemed like a cold, cynical document, a jarring intrusion into their fairy tale romance. Richard had dismissed it as a mere formality, a piece of paper for the bean counters. Now it was her only life raft in a sea of uncertainty. But I'll have to prove it. Olivia said, the practicalities of the situation crashing down on her. He'll deny it. He'll say the picture is old, that it's photoshopped. He'll hire the best lawyers in the city to paint me as a hysterical gold-digging wife. Let him try, Maya said, a predatory glint in her eye. Public opinion is a powerful thing, Liv. And right now, public opinion is not on his side. She pulled out her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. She brought up the gossip site, the comments section, a raging dumpster fire of public outrage, while his pregnant wife is at home. What a pig, Chloe Vanderbilt, is a notorious home wrecker. No surprise there. I hope his wife takes him to the cleaners. The comments were a balm to her wounded soul. She wasn't alone. The world saw him for what he was. But it wasn't enough. A few nasty comments on a gossip blog wouldn't bring down a man like Richard Sterling. He would weather the storm, release a carefully crafted PR statement, and in a few weeks the world would move on to the next scandal. I need more than just a picture, Maya. Olivia said, her voice growing stronger, a new and unfamiliar resolve taking root in the ashes of her heartbreak. I need something he can't deny, something that will ruin him. Maya looked at her, a slow, admiring smile spreading across her face. There's the Olivia I know, the one who aced her thesis on investigative journalism. You've been playing the part of the dutiful wife for so long, I think you forgot who you really are. It was true. She had submerged her own identity in her own ambitions and passions, taking a back seat to his all-consuming career. She had become an extension of him, a beautifully dressed accessory on his arm, and in doing so she had given him all the power. No more. His entire life is a lie. Maya. Olivia said, her mind racing the pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even realized she was solving starting to click into place. The charity work for his foundation, the ethical sourcing of his building materials, the carefully cultivated image of a self-made man. It's all a facade. I've seen things. I've overheard conversations. I never put it all together. She thought of the late-night meetings with men in expensive suits who looked more like gangsters than businessmen. The hushed, cryptic phone calls about zoning variances and political donations. The second set of accounting books she'd accidentally stumbled upon in his home office, which he'd quickly explained away as creative tax strategies. At the time, she had chosen to believe him to turn a blind eye to the darkness that lurked beneath the glittering surface of their life. Now she saw it all with a terrifying clarity. "He's not just a cheater, Maya." Olivia said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "He's a crook, and I'm going to expose him for what he really is." The decision once made was like a shot of adrenaline. The grief was still there, a dull, throbbing ache in her chest. But it was now overlaid with a new and exhilarating sense of purpose. She was no longer a victim. She was a woman on a mission. That evening, when Richard finally came home, he found her sitting in the living room, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. She looked calm, composed, almost serene. He, on the other hand, was a mess. His tie was loosened, his hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Liv." He began, his voice thick with a carefully rehearsed contrition. "I am so sorry. I know I messed up. The meeting, it was a nightmare. I should have been there. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you." She looked at him, her gaze cool and steady. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply held up her phone, the picture of him and Chloe displayed on the screen. The color drained from his face. He stared at the image, his jaw working for a long, silent moment. The mask of the charming, devoted husband slipped, and for the first time, she saw the real Richard Sterling. He was cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless. "You should have been more careful," she said, her voice as calm and quiet as the eye of a hurricane. "Social media is a tricky thing." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Don't be naive, Olivia. You think a silly picture is going to hurt me. I'll have my PR team issue a statement. We'll say it was a business trip, that Chloe is a client. It will all blow over." "I'm sure it will," she said, standing up, the movement fluid and graceful. She walked to the window, her back to him, and looked out at the city that he believed he owned. "But this isn't about the picture, Richard. This is about everything else." He frowned, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" She turned to face him, a small, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. "You really should be more careful about the things you leave lying around your office. Zoning variances, political donations, creative tax strategies. It's all so fascinating." The blood drained from his face. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. And in her eyes, he didn't see the quiet, adoring wife he had married. He saw a stranger, a formidable, intelligent, and very, very angry stranger. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice hoarse, with a dawning, horrified realization. "Nothing yet," she said, her smile widening. "But the night is young, and I have a feeling tomorrow's headlines are going to be very, very interesting." The penthouse, once a symbol of her gilded cage, transformed into Olivia's strategic command center. The initial dizzying rush of defiance had settled into a cold, calculated resolve. She was no longer just a scorned wife. She was an intelligence operative deep in enemy territory. Every creak of the floorboards, every chime of the elevator sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. Richard was home less and less consumed with what he called damage control for the St. Bart's photo, a firestorm that his PR team was struggling to extinguish. This gave Olivia the time she needed. With Maya acting as her handler on the outside, they began to map out their strategy. "He's arrogant," Maya had said during one of their encrypted calls, and arrogant men get sloppy. He won't believe you have the guts or the intelligence to actually do anything. Use that. Olivia did. She played the part of the wounded, withdrawn wife to perfection. She was quiet, tearful, and seemingly broken. When Richard was home, she would flinch from his touch, her silence a constant passive-aggressive rebuke that fed his ego. He saw her as defeated, which was precisely what she wanted. Her first target was his home office. It was his sanctuary, a sleek, minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a desk carved from a single piece of obsidian. It was where he held his most secret meetings and took his most cryptic calls. She had a key, of course, but he'd recently installed a new state-of-the-art security system with a keypad. For days, she watched him, her mind a sponge absorbing every detail. She noticed he would often tap his fingers on the table when he was thinking a nervous, rhythmic pattern. One evening, as he was distracted by a furious phone call with his publicist, she watched from the doorway as he absently tapped out the code on the desk before entering it into the keypad. It was a sequence of 8 digits, the date of his first major real estate acquisition. It was so perfectly, narcissistically him. The next day, as soon as he left for the office, she was inside. The room smelled of him. Expensive cologne and an undercurrent of metallic tension. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she began her search. She wasn't looking for paper. Richard was too smart for that. Everything was digital, protected by layers of encryption. Her librarian skills, once a source of gentle mockery for Richard's high-flying friends, were now her sharpest weapon. She knew how to find information, how to see patterns in chaos. She remembered stumbling upon a strange-looking external hard drive a few months ago, tucked away in a drawer of his antique Globe bar. He had snatched it from her, his reaction unusually sharp, saying it was a backup of old family photos. It was the only time he had ever seemed genuinely rattled by her presence in his office. It was still there, nestled between a bottle of 25-year-old Macallan and a set of crystal tumblers. It was a sleek silver rectangle, no bigger than a deck of cards. Plugging it into his desktop, she was met with a password prompt. She tried the usuals: his birthday, her birthday, their anniversary, the name of his first company. Nothing. Frustration gnawed at her. She sat in his leather chair, the silence of the apartment pressing in on her. What was the one thing he loved more than his money? More than his own reflection, his legacy, the narrative he had so carefully constructed. She thought back to their first date, how he had spoken with such passion about the Sterling Tower, the gleaming skyscraper that was his crowning achievement. He had called it his true north. She typed the words into the password field, True North 212. The drive unlocked. It was a labyrinth of folders and subfolders, a digital maze of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and encrypted ledgers. It was the second set of books she had glimpsed, but on a scale she could never have imagined. This wasn't just creative tax strategy. This was a massive, sophisticated web of fraud, bribery, and money laundering. Millions of dollars siphoned from company accounts, moved through a series of untraceable transactions and funneled into the pockets of city officials, zoning board members, and union bosses. She found a folder labeled Project Nightingale. Inside was a detailed accounting of payments made to a shell corporation, which in turn had made a series of political donations to Councilman Robert Jennings, a man who had been instrumental in pushing through the zoning changes for Richard's latest luxury development. It was a clear, undeniable case of bribery. Her hands trembled as she copied the files onto a new encrypted thumb drive she had purchased with cash. This was it. This was more than just a messy divorce. This was a federal crime. But as she was about to eject the drive, a different folder caught her eye. It was labeled Chloe. Her breath hitched. Against her better judgment, she clicked it open. It wasn't love letters or romantic photos. It was a series of wire transfers, monthly payments of $50,000 sent to Chloe Vanderbilt for the past 2 years. The memo on each transfer was the same consulting fee. And then she saw the contract, a non-disclosure agreement signed by Chloe that essentially paid her to be Richard's public girlfriend. The contract stipulated a certain number of public appearances, a steady stream of social media posts, and absolute discretion about the true nature of their arrangement. It was a business transaction. Even his affair was a carefully managed illusion. The realization didn't lessen the pain, but it sharpened her anger into a diamond-hard point. He hadn't just betrayed her. He had cheapened the very idea of love and affection, reducing it to another line item on his balance sheet. As she was absorbing this new, sickening revelation, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. The chime of the private elevator. He was back. Her mind raced. She couldn't be found here. Not now. She hastily ejected the thumb drive, shoved it into her pocket, and tried to close the folders, but her fumbling fingers betrayed her. The Chloe folder was still open on the screen. She shut down the computer, praying it would be fast enough. The sound of his key in the front door was a death knell. She slipped out of the office, closing the door silently behind her, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was halfway down the hall when he walked in, his face a thunderous mask. "What were you doing?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. I was looking for a book," she stammered, her mind seizing on the first plausible lie. "I thought I left one in there." His eyes, cold and assessing, swept over her, then flickered towards the office door. He walked past her into the room she had just vacated. She stood frozen in the hallway, every muscle tensed. She heard the soft whir of the computer booting up, a silence that stretched for an eternity. When he emerged, his face was unreadable. He looked at her, a long, searching gaze that seemed to peel back the layers of her deception. She braced herself for the explosion, for the accusations, for the end of the charade. But instead he smiled. It was a slow, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Find your book?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. "No," she whispered. It wasn't there. "Too bad," he said, walking towards her. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch unexpectedly gentle. "You look tired, Liv. Why don't you go lie down? I'll have dinner sent up." It was a dismissal, a threat wrapped in a velvet glove. He knew, or he suspected, and he was letting her know that he was watching. The game had changed. He was no longer underestimating her. He was hunting her. As she walked to their bedroom on unsteady legs, the encrypted thumb drive in her pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She had the ammunition she needed to destroy him. But now it was a race against time. She had to get it to someone who could use it before he found a way to silence her for good. The air in the penthouse had become thin and sharp, each breath a calculated risk. Richard's feigned gentleness was far more terrifying than any overt rage. He moved around the apartment with a predatory grace, his eyes constantly following her. He would ask casual questions about her day, about her phone calls, about her conversations with Maya. It was a subtle psychological water torture designed to make her break. She knew her digital footprint was being monitored, her phone likely bugged. The game had escalated, and she was running out of moves. "You can't do this alone anymore," Maya insisted, during a hushed meeting in a noisy coffee shop, a place so public and mundane she hoped it was safe. "You need to get that drive to a professional, someone he can't buy or intimidate." There was only one name that came to mind: Thea Gallo. Gallo was a legend, an old-school investigative journalist with a Pulitzer Prize and a reputation for being a bulldog. She had taken down corrupt senators, exposed corporate malfeasance at the highest levels, and was famously immune to the charms and threats of powerful men. Her column in the New York Chronicle was a weekly dose of righteous fury that struck fear into the hearts of the city's elite. Richard hated her. He had once called her a bitter, sanctimonious harpy after she'd written a scathing piece about the tax breaks given to his company. Contacting her was the next challenge. Olivia couldn't use her own phone or email. She went to a public library, a place that felt like a return to a former, safer self, and used a computer to create an anonymous email address. Her message was brief and cryptic. Subject: Project Nightingale. "I have information about Richard Sterling, information he would kill to keep quiet. If you want the biggest story of your career, meet me." Friday, 4 p.m. The Folly. The Folly was a forgotten, graffiti-covered ruin in Central Park, a decorative structure from the 19th century that was now little more than a curiosity for tourists. It was open public, yet offered enough secluded corners to have a conversation without being easily seen. She signed the email Cassandra. The Trojan princess cursed to speak the truth but never be believed. It felt fitting. The 2 days leading up to the meeting were the longest of her life. She felt Richard's suspicion like a physical weight, his presence a constant, suffocating pressure. He suggested they go away for the weekend to their house in the Hamptons. "Just the two of us," he'd said, his voice laced with a meaning that made her skin crawl. "We need to reconnect." She made an excuse, a checkup with Dr. Evans she couldn't possibly miss. The lie felt flimsy, and she saw a flicker of cold anger in his eyes, before he masked it with a sigh of disappointment. On Friday, she dressed in the most anonymous clothes she owned: jeans, a nondescript grey hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. She took a meandering route to the park, switching subway trains 3 times, paying with cash. She felt like a character in a spy novel, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Thea Gallo was already there. She was smaller than Olivia had imagined, with a shock of unruly salt and pepper hair, and eyes that were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. She was leaning against a stone archway, pretending to read a book. But Olivia could see her gaze sweeping the area, cataloguing every person who walked by. Cassandra Thea asked, her voice a low, gravelly rasp, not even looking up from her book as Olivia approached. "Yes. You've got 5 minutes to convince me this isn't a waste of my time." Olivia's hands trembled as she pulled the thumb drive from her pocket. "It's all on here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Everything. The shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the ledgers for Project Nightingale. He has Councilman Jennings in his pocket. It's all documented." Thea finally looked at her, her gaze sharp and appraising. She didn't take the drive. A lot of people make accusations against Richard Sterling. He's a rich, powerful man. It comes with the territory. Why should I believe you because I'm his wife? The words hung in the air between them. Thea's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She studied Olivia's face, seeing past the hoodie and the fear to the desperate resolve beneath. Why Thea asked the single word encompassing a universe of questions. Why now? Why turn on him? What's in it for you?" Olivia's hand went to her stomach, a gesture that was both protective and defiant. "He missed our baby's first ultrasound to be with his mistress in St. Bart's," she said, her voice cracking with a raw, undeniable pain. "He thinks I'm just a quiet, stupid accessory he can discard when he's bored. He's about to find out how wrong he is. It was the detail that sealed it. Not the financial data, but the human story. The betrayal." Thea Gallo knew that the best stories weren't about numbers. They were about hubris, and Richard Sterling's hubris was about to be his downfall. She held out her hand. "Give it to me." Olivia placed the drive in her palm. The transfer of power was immediate. The weight on her shoulders lifted, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating sense of inevitability. She had lit the fuse. Now all she could do was wait for the explosion. "Go home," Thea said, her voice softening slightly. "Act normal. Say nothing. Don't contact me again. I'll find you if I need you. And Olivia." Olivia turned. "Be careful." The first article dropped 4 days later. It was the front-page story of the Chronicle above the fold. The headline was a masterpiece of journalistic aggression: Sterling's Shadow Empire, a trail of bribes, shell companies, and betrayed trust. The article didn't mention Olivia. It didn't mention Chloe Vanderbilt or the trip to St. Bart's. It was a cold, surgical dissection of Richard's business practices. Thea laid out the evidence with meticulous precision, detailing the creation of the Shell Corporation, the suspicious timing of the political donations to Councilman Jennings, and the subsequent favorable zoning decisions that had netted Sterling's company hundreds of millions of dollars. She didn't publish the documents themselves that would be her next move, but she described their contents in such detail that it was clear her source was impeccable. Olivia was in the kitchen making tea when Richard came storming in, his face purple with rage. He was holding a copy of the paper, his knuckles white as he gripped it. "Did you see this trash?" he roared, slamming the paper down on the marble island. "That vindictive witch. She's been trying to come after me for years. Someone is feeding her lies." Lies. He was looking at her, his eyes boring into her, searching for any flicker of guilt, any sign of triumph. She met his gaze with a carefully constructed mask of wide-eyed concern. "My God, Richard," she said, her voice trembling slightly. That's horrible. Who would do such a thing?" He stared at her for a long moment, the silence stretching into an unbearable tension. She could see the gears turning in his mind, the paranoia warring with his ingrained belief in her meekness. He wanted to believe she was incapable of such a calculated betrayal. His ego demanded it. Finally, he seemed to make a decision. He let out a long, weary breath, the rage seeming to drain out of him, replaced by a practiced performance of a man under siege. "I don't know," he said, slumping into a chair. "But I'm going to find out. And when I do, I am going to destroy them." He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "I need you by my side for this, Liv. We have to present a united front, you and me against the world, just like we always planned." He reached for her hand. His touch was like ice. "Of course, darling," she said, forcing a smile as she allowed him to pull her closer. "Whatever you need." As she stood there, his arm around her, the smell of his fury and fear filling the air, she felt a cold, terrifying certainty. This was just the beginning. The story was out. The storm had broken, and they were standing directly in its path. Thea Gallo's article was not a bomb. It was a contagion. It spread through the city's financial and political ecosystems with terrifying speed, infecting every aspect of Richard's life. The first 48 hours were a whirlwind of frantic phone calls, cancelled meetings, and the palpable chill of his powerful friends suddenly becoming unavailable. The sterling brand, once synonymous with luxury and success, was now tainted by the whiff of corruption. Richard, true to form, came out swinging. He convened a press conference in the lobby of Sterling Tower, a marble and glass cathedral to his own ego. Standing before a wall of cameras, with Olivia positioned slightly behind him, as the supportive stoic wife, he was a masterclass in controlled indignation. "These are baseless smears," he thundered, his voice resonating with rehearsed outrage. "The work of a journalist with a personal vendetta and a cowardly anonymous source who is feeding her lies. My business dealings are an open book. My success was earned through hard work and innovation, not by cutting corners or breaking laws. We will be pursuing every available legal option against the New York Chronicle for this malicious and defamatory attack." Olivia played her part, her expression a perfect blend of concern for her husband and dignified defiance. Inside, she was a roiling sea of anxiety and a grim, burgeoning satisfaction. She watched him lie to the world, to the battery of reporters, and felt not a shred of her former love, only a profound and chilling alienation. The man she had married had never really existed. He was a performance, and this was his grandest, most desperate one yet. But the performance wasn't working. Thea Gallo was too respected, her reporting too meticulous. The story had legs. The district attorney's office issued a terse no comment when asked if they were looking into the allegations, a phrase that in political parlance meant, yes, absolutely. Investors in his new development project began to get nervous. A Japanese consortium, which had been poised to inject $500 million into the deal, announced they were postponing their decision pending further review. The stock price of Sterling Enterprises, his publicly traded parent company, dipped 5%, then 10%. The pressure began to fray Richard at the edges. The mask of the confident tycoon would slip, revealing the snarling, paranoid man beneath. The penthouse, once a quiet sanctuary, became a pressure cooker. He would pace for hours, phone fused to his ear, alternating between barking orders at his legal team and trying to soothe the nerves of his dwindling allies. His suspicion of Olivia was a constant, unspoken hum beneath the surface of their interactions. He had his security team sweep the apartment for bugs, a move he explained as standard procedure given the circumstances. He bought her a new phone, a present, he said, but she knew it was a tracking device, a way to monitor her every communication. She used it only for mundane conversations, continuing to communicate with Maya through a cheap burner phone she kept hidden in a box of tampons, the one place she knew he would never look. Then came the Chloe problem. The influencer, who had built a career on being aspirational and carefree, was not equipped for this kind of crisis. The comments on her Instagram feed had turned vicious. She was no longer just a home wrecker. She was now associated with a brewing criminal scandal. Her sponsors began to pull out. A lucrative contract with a high-end tequila brand was suddenly under review. Chloe panicked. She started calling Richard constantly, her voice a shrill, hysterical whine that Olivia could hear even from the next room. "You have to fix this, Richie," she'd shrieked during one call Olivia overheard. "My reputation is ruined. That journalist is going to start digging into me next. I just know it. Our contract says you're supposed to handle this stuff." Their business arrangement was crumbling under the pressure. Chloe, the carefully curated asset, had become a massive liability. After one particularly nasty, hour-long phone call. Richard smashed a Lalique vase against the wall, the sound of shattering crystal echoing the state of his life. He turned to Olivia, his eyes wild. "Do you see what they're doing to us?" "To our family," he demanded, as if she were a co-conspirator in his own defense. It was in that moment that Olivia decided to twist the knife. "Maybe you should just pay her more," she said, her voice deceptively gentle. She was arranging a bouquet of fresh lilies, her movements calm and deliberate. Richard froze. "What did you say, Chloe?" Olivia said, not looking at him. "It's clearly a business arrangement. You have a contract after all. Maybe you just need to renegotiate her consulting fee to include hazard pay." The blood drained from his face. It was a direct hit. The one piece of information he couldn't fathom how she would know. He had been so careful with that folder, so certain of his digital security. The look in his eyes was no longer mere suspicion. It was a cold, terrifying certainty. "How do you know about that?" he whispered, his voice shaking with a rage that was far more potent than his earlier theatrics. Olivia finally looked up, meeting his gaze with a cool, level stare. "You're a terrible liar, Richard. And you're sloppy. You leave things open on your computer." The charade was over. The unspoken war was now declared. "You," he seethed, taking a step towards her. "This was you. You went to Gala." "Prove it," she said, her voice steady, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. He stalked towards her, his face a mask of fury, his hands clenched into fists. For a terrifying second, she thought he was going to hit her. She stood her ground, her chin held high, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. His eyes followed the movement, and he stopped, his chest heaving. The baby, her silent, unknowing protector. "I am going to ruin you," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous promise. "When this is over, you will have nothing. No money, no friends. People will see you for the vindictive, gold-digging snake you are. I will make sure of it." "You can't ruin me, Richard," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Because I was never one of your assets, and you are about to learn what happens when you write off a liability that knows all your secrets." He stared at her, breathing heavily, the hatred in his eyes a palpable force. The battle lines were drawn. It was no longer about money or infidelity. It was a primal struggle for survival. He would use all his power, all his wealth and influence to crush her. But she had the one thing he didn't: the truth. And she had given it to a woman who was about to publish her second installment. The fallout was just beginning. The week after their confrontation was a new kind of hell. The penthouse was no longer a home, but a battlefield, thick with the silence of unspoken threats. Richard had his lawyers draft a public statement for Olivia to sign a declaration of her unwavering belief in his innocence. She refused. Her defiance sent him into a silent, simmering rage that was more unnerving than any of his shouted tirades. He had her followed. A sleek black town car would be parked across the street whenever she left the building. He was trying to intimidate her, to isolate her, to box her in. Meanwhile, Thea Gallo's second article hit the newsstands. This one was even more devastating than the first. The headline was stark: "The Sterling Ledgers. A how-to guide for bribing public officials." Thea, using the information from the thumb drive, published redacted snippets of the financial records from the Project Nightingale folder. She detailed the exact dates and amounts of the wire transfers from Sterling Enterprises to the Shell Company, and from the Shell Company to Councilman Jennings' campaign fund. It was a smoking gun, a clear and undeniable map of corruption. The story ignited a political firestorm. Councilman Jennings held a disastrous press conference where he sweated profusely and denied everything, looking guiltier with every word. The mayor, a longtime ally of Richard's, was forced to call for an independent investigation. The sharks were circling. Olivia watched it all unfold from her gilded prison, a strange mix of terror and triumph churning in her gut. She had set this in motion, but the story now had a life of its own, a powerful momentum she couldn't control. The breakthrough came from a place she hadn't expected. In a quiet suburb in New Jersey, a man named Frank Miller read Thea Gallo's latest article, his morning coffee growing cold in his hands. Frank was Sterling Enterprises' former chief financial officer. He was a quiet, meticulous accountant who had worked for Richard for 15 years. A year ago, Frank had discovered the Project Nightingale discrepancies. He had gone to Richard naively believing his boss would be horrified that it must be some kind of mistake. Richard had fired him on the spot. He'd had him sign an ironclad NDA in exchange for a meager severance package and threatened to ruin his reputation in the industry if he ever spoke a word. Frank, a man with a mortgage and 2 kids in college, had been terrified into silence. But seeing Thea's article, seeing the very secrets he had been forced to keep, laid bare for the world to see, sparked a flicker of courage in his long dormant conscience. He knew he had something even more valuable than the ledgers Thea had published. He had the recordings. Richard, in his arrogance, had a habit of recording his meetings. He called it keeping an accurate record. Frank knew it was for blackmail purposes. For his own protection, Frank had made a copy of one specific recording before he was fired, the meeting where Richard and Councilman Jennings explicitly discussed the quid pro quo arrangement. The zoning variance in exchange for a series of offshore payments. It was the one piece of evidence that could send them both to prison. After a week of agonizing of sleepless nights and hushed, fearful conversations with his wife, Frank Miller made a decision. He found Thea Gallo's contact information and sent her a one-line email. "I have the rest of your story." Thea, sensing the magnitude of the moment, arranged to meet him immediately. The recording was everything she had hoped for, and more. The audio quality was crystal clear. Richard's voice, smug and self-assured, laying out the terms of the bribe. Jennings's greedy, eager acceptance. It was the nail in the coffin. Richard, however, was not a man to go down without a fight. He was bleeding money, his allies were abandoning him in droves, and the DA was impaneling a grand jury. He was desperate, and his desperation made him reckless. Through his own network of private investigators, he found out that Thea had been in contact with a disgraced former CFO. He put 2 and 2 together, and realized Frank Miller was about to betray him. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He drove out to Frank's suburban home himself. No lawyers, no security. He thought he could intimidate his former employee back into silence the way he always had. He offered Frank money, a lot of it, to disappear, to deny everything. When Frank refused his newfound courage holding firm, Richard's temper snapped. The argument spilled out onto the front lawn. "You are nothing!" Richard screamed, his face contorted with rage, completely oblivious to the neighbor across the street who was filming the entire exchange on her phone. "I made you, and I will destroy you. I will ruin your family." The threat, crude and desperate, was a critical error. The neighbor who had already been following the Sterling scandal in the news immediately sent the video to the local TV station. By that evening, the footage was everywhere. Richard Sterling, the sophisticated billionaire, was exposed as a common thug, threatening a scared, middle-aged man on his own front lawn. It shattered the last remnants of his public image. It was ugly, it was raw, and it was undeniable. Back in the penthouse, Olivia watched the news report, her hand covering her mouth in shock. This was beyond anything she could have orchestrated. Richard's own hubris, his own uncontrollable rage, was proving to be his most effective enemy. The phone rang. It was Maya. "It's over, Liv," she said, her voice awestruck. He just handed the prosecution a witness tampering charge on a silver platter. "He's done." Later that night, the doorbell rang. It wasn't Richard. It was two detectives from the NYPD. They were polite, professional, and deeply uncomfortable. "Mrs. Sterling," one of them began, "we have a warrant for your husband's arrest. We have reason to believe he may be here." Olivia stood in the doorway of the life that was now collapsing around her. She had a choice. She could have told them he wasn't there, bought him a few more hours of freedom. But she thought of the ultrasound of the cold clinical room, of the lie about Dubai, of the casual cruelty in his eyes when he realized she knew. She looked past the detectives down the long marble hallway towards the master bedroom, where she knew he was hiding, making frantic phone calls to lawyers who were no longer answering. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "He's here. Please come in." The arrest was a quiet, humiliating affair. There was no dramatic chase, just the surreal sight of Richard Sterling, his face slack with shock, being led out of his own penthouse in handcuffs. The click of the cuffs was the punctuation mark at the end of their marriage. In the days that followed, Richard's empire imploded. The recording from Frank Miller and the witness tampering video created an open and shut case. His allies vanished, and his company fell apart. Thayer Gallo's final article was less an exposé and more a eulogy for a fallen titan, noting that Richard's greatest liability was his inability to see the value in the people he considered his assets. Guided by Maya Olivia, filed for divorce. The infidelity clause, bolstered by the St. Bart's photo and Chloe Vanderbilt's tell-all interview, made the proceedings swift. Richard, facing decades in prison, signed the papers from a holding cell. Olivia took what the prenup stipulated, a fortune she didn't want for herself. She sold the penthouse, erasing every trace of him to scrub clean the gilded cage. 6 months later, Olivia was living in a sun-drenched Brooklyn brownstone. The proceeds from the sale were in a trust for her daughter Lily, and funded a new foundation she started to provide legal aid to women in abusive relationships. She returned to work at the library, not for the money, but for the peace it brought her. One afternoon, while rocking her 1-month-old daughter, a news alert popped up on her phone. It was the headline she had been waiting for. Sterling sentenced to 20 years. Judge cites staggering arrogance. She read that his downfall was traced back to a single ill-advised beach selfie. Looking at Lily sleeping in her arms, Olivia whispered, "He thought he was the star of the show, but he was just the villain in our story. And we get to write the happy ending." The story of Richard Sterling was over. Hers was just beginning. She was no longer a wife or a victim, but a mother, a philanthropist, and a survivor who had turned his ugliest secrets into a force for good. He wanted a headline, and she had given him exactly what he deserved. And there you have it. A story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate triumph. Olivia's journey shows us that sometimes the greatest strength is found in our most painful moments. It's a reminder that no one is untouchable, and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of coming to light. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of truth and the strength of the human spirit, then please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button if you were cheering for Olivia. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Your support allows us to keep telling these important stories. Thank you for listening.